Good morning, traders. Steve Ganz here, going to run a trade concept by you. Of course, any trades I suggest here, these are all paper trades, specifically geared toward helping people understand different sort of trade concepts and ideas. So what I wanted to do right now is I'm taking a look at optionstrat, and I'm looking specifically at the flow summary. So this is a great tool. It gives me an idea of, what volume is coming into different stocks in a bullish or a bearish flow. Now we can see that Apple is kind of at top of the chart here on the bearish side, but it's not overly bearish. We look at that little red indicator. I mean, this dial goes all the way around, so it's not overly bearish. Plus, let me just take a look here at Apple, and we can see that Apple just has a very, very consistent uptrend. It is toward the high. I mean, it made new highs this last week, but there's not a lot of room for it maybe to drop. I mean, I don't think, it's I think it's largely going to maintain this trend line. So I don't consider it to be a real strong candidate for what I'm looking for. So let me look here at NVDA. We can see there's huge volume on NVDA. So if I look at NVDA, it's a bit more bearish. We can see a lot of the activity here that is bearish focused on NVIDIA as well. So let's take a look at a chart of NVIDIA and see what that looks like. And if we look at NVIDIA, so it had a huge gap up here from 300 to 350, 360, then it ran all the way up to 445. So that's a massive run. Now, one of the things that tends to happen with stock is they tend to do what's called fill the gap. They tend to pull back and usually fill the gap. Now, NVIDIA doesn't all the time. You can see it didn't here. However, I do think it's possibly overextended. And it is showing a little weakness here. But if we look at a trading range, so NVIDIA in recent times has traded between 440 and then I would call it down here at 370. So 440 to 370. That's a pretty wide range. And I think it's likely to probably stay in that range. But again, I'd be slightly more bearish on it right now because I do believe that it's probably oversold a bit. So what can I do with this information? How might I build an options trade around this? So what I would do is I could come back here into NVIDIA. I can select a type of trade that I want to look at here, or I can even use the optimize button and say that I'm a little bearish on NVIDIA, and it will give me a whole series of potential trades to consider, which are all great candidates. Now, I'm going to go with something a little bit different than what these candidates are, and I'll explain to you why in just a second. So what I want to go with is actually going to be a condor, okay, an iron condor. But I'm going to skew this condor. So this is what a normal, if I were to just put this trade on right now, this is essentially a neutral positioned condor in NVIDIA. But if my premise is a little bit more bearish in nature, and I'm envisioning, if we go back to this, that the activity will be between, call it 440 and maybe down to 370. I want to build a trade that kind of works off that premise. So here our break even is 449. So I'm going to bring that in a little bit. Excuse me. So I'll probably do something like this to get that break even, around that 440 range, somewhere in there. But I don't want massive upside risk on this trade, so I'll bring in my wing a little bit. So I've kind of got that position maybe where I want it, but how I'm going to now skew this to give it a little more downside room, if you will, is I will take the bottom half of this and I can move it quite a ways out. I think I'd said 370 is where we wanted to kind of have our risk on the downside. So I can even pull this in a little bit further. And so I can do something along these lines. And if we take a look at this trade, so basically, and I can tighten this up even further if I wanted on the downside so that I have even less risk. Now that does give me a little more risk on the upside, but again, that risk is a ways away. So if we started moving in that direction, etc., there's things you can do to adjust a trade. But right now, this largely accomplishes what I'm looking at. I'm not expecting to go above 440 on the upside. I'm not really expecting to probably go below 370 on the downside. But if I do, I've got a lot less risk on the downside, which again was my kind of my goal here, because if it does go down to fill that gap, I don't want to have that risk on the table. I'm going fairly short out in expiration here so that this will decay fairly quickly. So if we take a look at this trade upon entry, we're going to be right here. Now we can see if you're using the base level of OptionStrat, you won't have all the Greeks. But in the paid version, you'll be able to see all your Greeks here. Now our Greeks tell us we're negative delta here, which means that we will profit in this trade if the market drops. Okay, that's what the Greeks are telling us. Again, Greeks are theoretical. They're calculations that are made about how options work. So there's no guarantees of this, but that's kind of what the modeling tells us. We have theta decay at the rate of about $13 a day. So on average, each day, about $13 in profit will drip into this trade, all other things being equal. And then we get into gamma, which is the shape of our curve here, how quickly movement will take place, one direction or the other. And then vega is a measure of volatility. How much will this trade be impacted by volatility? And rho is a factor of interest rates, and we don't really need to get into that much for shorter term positions. That's something you would look at if you were holding positions for a much longer period of time. So that's kind of our game plan here. As we get in this trade, we want NVIDIA to either stay about where it is or even, pull back down here into this 380, 390 range, something along those lines. Then as time decays in this trade, we can see that our dashed line here represents the halfway point in this trade into what our volatility, or excuse me, what our profitability would look like at the halfway mark. So, we can kind of come into this, we can play time forward, and we can just sort of see as we play our time forward, if the underlying doesn't move and we play this thing forward for about 2 weeks, you're at about $300 in profit in this trade. If we get a pullback during that period of time, this trade could reach some profitability even faster. Now, I don't tend to keep my trades to expiration. So in this trade, I'm not looking to get this $760 out of this trade. Now, there's nothing wrong with that if that's something that someone wants to do. It just happens to be that I don't really trade that way. I'd rather just get in, get maybe a 10% profit or so on this trade, 10% of the risk I'm taking, which I'm taking approximately $1,600 in risk. We can see exactly what that is. Max loss is $1,730. So, I'm looking to get $170 out of this trade. If I am right on my premise here that we get a little bit of a pullback, it's not out of the realm of possibility that in a week or two, if we get a little bit of a pullback maybe, and we get a week or two's worth of decay, I could hit my profit target on this and just be out of the trade at that point. Or I could choose to adjust this trade in a way that maybe makes it a more delta neutral trade so that it no longer has this skew if my opinion of the trade changes. But again, I'm not really going to get involved in that at this point. So if I take a look at this trade, I want to go ahead and save this trade. And I'll share this in the link below as well. So this is an NVIDIA, I'm going to call it a skewed condor. And again, you can see that the whole purpose behind this is to take advantage of it either decaying where it is or possibly a little bit of a pullback. So again, I will save this trade. I will copy the link. I'll share it in the link below. I urge people to put this trade on in paper and see what happens with it going forward. Make some judgment calls as to where might you consider taking this trade off if this were a live trade in your account. Again, not recommending a live trade. These should all be paper until you fully understand how these different things move. Again, the big concept here is I wanted people to understand looking at flow to see that the big money considers this to be a little bit bearish at this point. We looked at a chart to determine that it may be a little overbought at this point, and it's starting to weaken a little bit. And then we defined our expected ranges as to, what range we might think this thing would play in for the next couple of weeks. And then we structured a trade around that. So that was the goal and objective here. And again, just copy the link if you'd like, and you can open it up in your OptionStrat software on your end. Take care, everyone.